Hello, and welcome to another exciting episode of Ruby for the Web. I am your host and your professor, Dr. John Baugh. For this lecture, we're going to go over REST and CRUD. Sounds kind of icky and dirty, but it's actually quite common, these particular acronyms. In web development, REST, which stands for Representational State Transfer, is an architectural style, and the web is actually based on this particular style as well. It's used for structuring how web applications communicate. Now, Rails embraces REST deeply. We would say that every resource, like a user or a post or anything that could be on a website, or many things that could be on a website, follow the consistent CRUD, which stands for create, read, update, delete, routes, and actions. A RESTful design organizes your applications around resources, which I mentioned, each of which can be created, viewed, okay, that's the reading, updated, or destroyed through specific HTTP methods. Now, I've put these methods on the screen for you right now. You can see that we can create, and you can see some of the specific URLs that could be used in order to get this information. So create, you would use the HTTP method post and then use the URL, whatever the full URL is, or subsection /users. That would create a new user. You can read all by putting a get and then doing /users. That will list all the users. Read, you can read one at a time by passing, for example, their ID at the end of the URL. And if you use notice that these are using post and get, but if you use patch or put with users /1, for example, it will update the user with ID 1. And then you send information separately about how you would change that. Now, if you send the delete HTTP method or HTTP verb, and you call it on user /1, that same URL, but using a different method, web browsers usually are using get. Okay, when you submit a form, it could use get, it could use post, but typically just web in general is using get because you're pulling a page down. But different commands you can send depending on how you interact with it can send these different verbs to the same URL and get interpreted differently. Okay, so if we wanted to delete the user with ID 1, that would be one way to do it. So that mapping provides predictability and consistency. The clients and developers can infer how to interact with any resource. In Rails, RESTful conventions aren't optional. They're built into the framework itself. So you have to use REST style. When you define a resource like, say, resources and then :users, Rails would automatically provide all 7 standard RESTful actions. You would get index, which lists all the items, show, shows a single item, new displays a form for a new item, create, process the form submission, edit would display a form filled with data that you can edit, update, process the updates, and then destroy would delete the item. So that's the foundation for all the CRUD. Remember, we have to remember CRUD. That's create, read, update, and delete. Create, read, update, and delete operations in Rails. So every model, controller, and route connects through REST, or Representational State Transfer. All right, we're going to minimize this for now. I'm going to open up my friend Visual Studio Code over here. And I've created a top-level folder here called lex6-rest CRUD, but we're going to actually create a Rails application underneath it. Okay, you could do it at a higher level, but I'm in Git Bash down here. I think we should be able to do it all through Git Bash, even on Windows. So I'm going to say Rails, and then you can specify a version like _8.0.3 _, and then I say new to say I'm creating a new application, and then we'll say REST demo app. Okay, hit enter, give it a couple minutes, and it should create for us a wonderful little website, Rails application, which it does. So you can see that it's generating all these folders and everything. Should be done momentarily. And the next thing we're going to do, once that is completed, is we can go into the folder. Okay, and we're going to use a cd command for that, but I'll wait a minute and let it complete. All right, so let's change to that directory now that it's done. cd rest demo app. So now we're in the primary Rails application folder, of course. Now we're going to expand this here, and we're going to go in the gem file. In the gem file, there's a couple things we want to change. One of them is the, if I can find it, the TZ info. We're going to actually take off this stuff that says platforms and all that fun stuff, because that tends to cause problems, I've noticed, in particular on Windows. So the other thing we're going to do, or that I found out doesn't seem to properly work, is the SQLite, unless you tell it specifically where to get it. And I'm going to copy this over from my notes. I'm going to replace this line with this one. Now, you'll notice what it says is it still says gem SQLite, right? And then comma git, G-I-T, so it tells it to go to GitHub and go to this Sparkle Motion / SQLite 3-Ruby, and then you give it a tag to tell it specifically what version, and it will download it. Okay, so the next thing we want to do to avoid problems, now that I've saved that file, everything's happy, we're going to do bundle config set force_ruby_platform space true. Okay, now that's going to help us configure the bundler, and then we're going to reinstall dependencies. So I'm going to delete the gemfile.lock. I'm sorry, let's use rm because we're in a bash shell. It's del if you're in PowerShell or Windows command line. But we're going to do gemfile.lock, not the regular gem file. We just edited that. Don't ruin your day. So you have to redo all of it. rm gemfile.lock is the one that we're going to remove. So the lock file's gone, because I found that tends to cause some problems sometimes. And then bundle install. Okay, give it a minute. It'll fetch the SQLite compatibility stuff, or SQLite stuff rather. And we'll see how this goes. That one shouldn't take too incredibly long, but we need this so that it can actually maintain a database. Okay, so Rails will automatically allow you to create a SQLite database, and we can store different data in that database. And if you're familiar with database technologies, you'll find a lot of what we work with, the very basics touching on it this week, but then when we go in subsequent weeks, you'll see that there's all kinds of cool stuff you can do with it. All right, so I'll pause again and we'll wait on this to finish. All right, so that's run through, and we will now try to run the database preparation. So ben rails db :prepare. Okay, so we're going into the bin folder. In case you're not sure what we're doing here, you go into the bin folder, and it's going to call the db. It'll do the db prepare. Well, Rails. It'll go into it'll call Rails from here, and then it will allow us to call the database preparation functionality right here. So if I hit enter, that's going to take what we just did and actually prepare the database. So it creates and migrates the dev and test databases wherever it's needed. Okay, so 1 second. I'm going to collapse that. There we go. Now, just so we don't forget how to use it, and because it's a very, very important skill to have as a software engineer, you want to make sure that you know how to use Git. And we're not using GitHub or a remote repository, but we do want to keep a local repository here. So git init, it may say we're redoing it because I think it automatically creates one. It does. So it'll say reinitialize, git repository, blah, blah, blah. And then you say git add, and then space dot. That'll add all of the folders that are not specified in the git ignore. Git ignore, if we open that file, this will tell it what not to, try to back up, because these are things that are, can be regenerated when you reinitialize the bundles and stuff. So it keeps it from being, a huge hog of resources. So git add. Okay, it still does add a lot of stuff. Now, what about git status? This will tell us all the stuff that's been added to this new repository that we've created. Okay, so new file, the Docker ignore files, it's got the gem files, configure, vendor, etc., etc. And once you've done that, you can actually commit it, git commit -m. The -m is the message, and then in double quotes, you have to put something like initial commit REST demo app setup. Okay, hit enter, and it will commit that. So it has actually created or put those files under properly under source control. Now, to test it out, to make sure all this is working, we're going to do bin/rails server, and we can see the server actually run. It's probably going to open it, or it's going to open it up, and then we can decide how we open it. I haven't changed the settings yet, so I'm going to copy that, I believe, and try to use, let me see here, I'm going to actually shift that. We're going to move that over there, Google. And then we go to 127.0.0.1 or localhost. You can also write localhost because that's basically an alias for that, localhost :5000, and in most cases it will go to the exact same thing. So it'll just show this basic default Rails setup here. All right, so that's the setup. Next, we're going to talk about Rails and RESTful routes. So as an overview, Rails routing system connects URLs to controller actions. Okay, URLs are connected to controller actions. We're going to talk a little bit more about what controllers are in a little bit. But rather than manually writing a route for every operation, Rails provides a simple declarative syntax that automatically generates all the RESTful paths. Okay, so for example, I'm going to open up my little document here. If you typed or used resources, space, and then :users. Oops, sorry, that was an accident. Don't really need to save that one. Resources, space, :users. That is going to tell Rails to create 7 routes following the REST conventions mapping each HTTP verb to a specific controller action. Those routes will follow the convention over configuration principle that Rails promotes. Okay, so you don't need to specify file names or methods manually. Rails will know where to find the controller, like user controller. It automatically knows since you called it users. It's going to create user controller, right? Or users controller rather. Which action to run, like show or update, and which view templates to render. So I'm going to put another little table under here. You can see specifically what really would get generated if we said resources users. So you would get users, and then you'd pass an ID, new users ID/edit users, and then ID, users ID, depending on what method is used. So gets, posts, patch put, or delete, and then it has a specific behavior. And then these are the controllers that are corresponding. We actually talked about some of this a little bit last week. Or last lecture. All right, so this RESTful routing pattern means that whether you're building users, products, posts, or comments, or anything else, the workflow feels identical. Rails applies the same pattern everywhere. And you can inspect all the routes. If we go over here, I'm going to go here and actually Control-C to exit the server. I can do bin/rails routes, and it will show me all the routes that are available. Now, it probably is not going to show me, or it's not going to show me any ones that I've created because I haven't created any yet, but these are the ones that are automatically part of this and available that it can detect. So that displays the full list of available paths, HTTP verbs, and controller actions. So let's generate a small example. I'm going to clear this so it's a little bit cleaner. And we're going to generate a small example to see RESTful routes in action. So from inside, again, we have to make sure we're in this REST demo app folder. That's the actual Rails folder. I'm going to say bin/rails generate scaffold space article, capital A, and then you're going to say space title colon string space content colon text. Okay, I'm going to hit enter, and it's going to generate the scaffolding for this, including all of those, these specific, updates of files and invocations and things like that, right? And creations. So we're going to say bin/rails db colon migrate. So that would update database necessarily to take into account this new table, essentially, this new entity article. Later on, you can do things like telling it, okay, user has many articles, and do all the database stuff you would expect to be able to do in a full database management system. But you can do it through Rails. Rails makes it pretty easy. bin/rails space routes. And now it's going to kind of show us that huge amount of stuff like it did earlier, but we'll see ours hopefully near the top. It'll be a little more obvious. There we go. So because of the articles creation, we see that it has indeed created the controllers available for us to get and create new and edit and show, update, delete, or destroy, in this case, everything that we need to. So that confirms that Rails has automatically defined the full RESTful interface for our article resource. Each route will correspond to one CRUD action in articles controller. Okay. As a gotcha, if you define routes manually, ensure that you don't unintentionally break the RESTful pattern. So using resources ensures Rails keeps the structure consistent and predictable. All right, so now we're going to dive a little bit deeper into scaffolding, which we kind of just did, but we're going to dive deeper into the actual concept. So in Rails, scaffolding is the fastest way to generate a complete resource that follows the REST and CRUD conventions. So with a single command, when we told it what to do, up here, right there. Yeah, there we go. With a single generation of this scaffolding with some simple commands, with that single command, Rails will create a model for the database interaction, a controller with all 7 RESTful actions, a full set of views, so the index, show, new, edit, etc. So, which of course you can create your own and customize and do all kinds of other stuff, but it gives you all of this, okay, basically for free, just because you type that command. It gives you a migration file, which will create the corresponding database table and the necessary routes. It sets up the routes for you, so we don't have to do anything manually like we kind of did a week ago or last lecture, right? So this provides an instant functional CRUD, create, read, update, delete, right? Application that you can run immediately. So it's perfect for exploring or exploration or creating prototypes. So why would you want to use scaffolding? It illustrates the complete Rails request cycle, so route, controller, model, view, and it demonstrates how REST actions map to real code. It saves setup time so you can focus on understanding structure and conventions. We would say that it takes care of the boilerplate code. So you can later remove scaffolding and rebuild parts manually once you understand what each piece is doing. So let's create a scaffolding for a different situation here. We're going to say bin/rails space generate and then scaffold user, right? Capital U with user. And it's going to contain properties name string and then email string. Hit enter. And then you're going to say that it will create the 7 RESTful actions. Okay, so you've got all of these created, right? So you've got creates and invokes and all these different files, ERBs files for them. And specifically, yeah, it has generated 7 new files. Okay, so it's created the, user, see if we can find them, user.rb, and yeah, right there, app model user.rb. And user's controller, it creates an index, show, new, edit, etc. And of course, it actually prepares the route and everything else that you need. All right. So next, we're going to apply the migration to create the users table in the database. So bin/rails db migrate, because right now we've got all the files to work with it, but there's nothing in the database. Okay, so if you say bin/rails db:/migrate, it will take into account this new entity, this user that you have here, and create it for our SQLite. We can start the dev server just to make sure that this works. Okay. See what we have now. All right. Let's copy that. And then we're going to grab, okay, that. And then we have this basic Rails application in front of us. But if I do something like /users, because we did create users as part of this, as an entity, a resource, it now lists this, and obviously this is not pretty and production ready, but it gives us everything we need to experiment. And there's a little hyperlink that says new user. We can click that, and it gives us this information right here. So we can put, say, John, and then, it's John at someuniversity.edu. I can click create user. And it says user was successfully created. You can destroy the user, edit the user, back to users. So if I go to back to users, you'll notice now that it is listing John right here. Okay, if I want to show that user, I can show the information related to that user and go to edit. So maybe I want to add in BAW, update it, and then back to users. And now you can see my full name, right? We can add another user. We could say Billy Bob. So it's billybob at somewebsite.com. Create that user. And we go back to users. And it will show John Baugh and also Billy Bob, right? So it's basically a full interface. It's very simple, but it's done all of this work for you. There's no setup that you're really responsible for as far as that basic setup's concerned. Okay. Couple things. We're able to view all the users using the index. We're able to create a new user. We're able to edit or delete existing users. Okay, so that entire flow demonstrates Rails, again, convention over configuration design. And you wrote only one command, and Rails basically built the full REST pipeline for you. Some gotchas are that every scaffold assumes you'll later customize views and controller logic, treat it as a learning tool, not a production ready tool. Okay, and avoid scaffolding too much at once. Focus on understanding the structure before additional models. So we've got a couple in here. We've got the article and the users. Some of this will play into stuff that we're likely to do in the next lecture. So let's walk through some of the CRUD actions, see what we can tell it to do. So now that you've scaffolded the resource, we're going to examine how each CRUD operation maps to Rails controller actions and views. So we said it maps to a controller, right? So each of the 7 RESTful routes has a specific purpose and corresponding method inside the generated controller. So they're located in, for example, if we go under app right here, right, /controllers, you'll notice that I have articles controller and users controller. There's also the application controller, which is the top level controller. If you go to users controller, you'll notice it's actually defined the proper routes for these. Okay. So you can follow this general pattern. So create, processes the user, responds to them, formats the HTML like we had before. You can also get JSON if you want to render it with JSON. You have that capability. Same thing with update, delete, some private data in this, or private methods rather, in this controller that are used elsewhere. So set user, user params, etc. So that gives you an idea of the structure. Now the get/users is going to, let's make sure, is this still running? I think it is. Yeah, it should be. Yeah, it's going to show basically every interaction we had with it. But anyway, it's we're going to create a new window here. I'm going to say localhost 5000, and we've got Rails, and I'm there's a couple things I could do here. I could say /users. That calls the get users, which is going to show all these. So that's done because of this get users or asking for users.json. It's just going to list all the users basically. Okay, so these are the actions that are allowed to be had there. But you could also go to specific users, user IDs. In fact, you can look, if you're careful, you could look at the hyperlink and where it actually goes. Okay, so if I copy the link address, I can just show you. Do you see how it's users, localhost 5000 users /1? And since we're using a get on that, it's going to show the record. Okay, you can destroy the user. So you call that, and then when you go back, it goes back to the users. I only see Billy Bob now because John got destroyed. Poor John. Wait, that's me. Anyway, okay, so key points. Each action corresponds to a distinct HTTP method. Rails automatically maps these routes via the resources :users in the config routes. Okay, so if we go over here and go to config and then routes.rb here, you can see that it has them declared as the different resources, right? So it knows that they exist because of this right here. We created articles first earlier on, and then users is the one we were just working with. The controller passes the data to views through instance variables like @users or just @user. Strong parameters, like user_parameter, protects against mass assignment vulnerabilities. And then gotchas are forgetting to whitelist the parameters in user params will cause update creates to fail silently. The before action callback keeps your code dry. Now, dry is the don't repeat yourself software engineering pattern. By loading the user record for multiple actions, and in development, route and controller changes hot reload. Okay, so you can restart the server mainly after adding gems or changing environment configuration. But in general, as long as you leave this open down here, you don't really need to worry about manually restarting it. All right, next up for discussion is MVC in action. So now that you've generated and explored a full scaffolded resource, it's time to understand how all the parts of Rails fit together. So Rails applications are built on top of something called MVC architectural pattern, the model view controller. You might hear it called a design pattern. It's more of an architectural pattern, but probably pedantic or splitting hairs at that point. But MVC is a foundational concept for all or many different web frameworks. Each component has a distinct role. So the model, the view, and the controller are the three components. Model manages the data and the business logic. So it communicates with the database directly via, for example, an active record. And the view is on the opposite side. So model basically is really, really far in the back. It's connected and interacts with the data. And it's under like app/models/user.rb. So if we go to app/models and then go to user.rb, this is pretty simple. It's just basically utilizing the application record rather than defining its own, a bunch of its own stuff. All right, so the view handles the presentation. So that's kind of on the opposite side. That's under app/views. Okay, so app/views. If I can find it, I always miss it. App/views. There it is. Dang it, right underneath. Okay. Users. There we go. And then you have, for example, index.html.erb. Okay, so this is kind of that embedded Ruby syntax. So it's got some things that look exactly like HTML, and then some stuff that allows us to write Ruby embedded in it as well. So it's similar concept or similar idea if you're familiar with other web frameworks like React, even though it's more of a library, I guess. It has things like JSX, Java or the extension language for working with React, right? Now, so that's the model and the view. Model's on kind of the farther back end, manages the data. The view interacts with the user. Now, the thing that binds them together, the one ring to rule them all, is the controller that orchestrates the logic. So receives a request, interacts with the model, and then chooses which view to render, for example. When you visit a URL like /users in the browser, Rails will follow the request flow where it's the browser request comes in. The router takes care of that request and sends it to the appropriate controller, which then loads the appropriate model, generates the appropriate view, and then the response is passed back. Okay. All right. So, and that division of responsibilities makes Rails apps clean, testable, and scalable. So we can demonstrate MVC in action by inspecting each component a little bit more clearly. Again, I kind of already opened one of these before, but we'll go back and look at it. I think I got excited and showed it to you too early, but that's fine. Okay, so you can go to app model. Okay, so you have models, and then user.rb. So this is the application record. So active record automatically provides accessors for the name and the email. And then corresponding to the database columns, validations or relationships can be added later. For the controller for the user, if you go to app controllers, okay, so there's model. If you go to app controllers right up here and go to user controller, this one is derived from the application controller. You have def index right there. So we saw that earlier. That's what's called with the get. And then you have, for example, app/views/users. So this is the view. Okay. So we did the model, we did the controller. Now it's for the views, users, and then you've got index.html.erb. This one basically is going to help list the users as expected, right? All right. So when you visit the localhost :5000/users, it'll show a complete database-backed HTML page, the result of the MVC cycle in motion. So some gotchas are forgetting to use the @ symbol before a variable. So for example, users instead of @users means the view won't see it. So instance variables are the bridge between controller and view. So each controller action automatically renders its corresponding view file by default. So you have index that has index.html.erb, and then show would be show.html.erb, etc. Models don't need to import anything. So Rails auto connects models to tables via naming convention. So user is connected to the users table automatically and so on. Okay, so another thing we could add just to kind of reinforce our understanding of the REST, CRUD, and MVC is another resource we're going to call micropost. Okay, so that example mirrors what we did with the user and even article earlier, providing that Rails conventions apply universally. So each new resource in Rails follows that same pattern. You define a model attribute, scaffold or manually create the controller and views, migrate the database, and interact with it in the browser just to make sure it works. Okay, so I'm going to kill that down there. I'm going to do bin/Rails space generate scaffold micropost space content : string, all connected, space user : references. Now you could use user ID, but we're going to do that because this is generally preferred. And once it's created all of that, we're going to do the migration, bin/Rails. So this basically is updating the database properly. So db : migrate. And then once it's done that, we do bin/Rails and then server. Okay. It'll load this. And we will go back to our friend here. And instead of users, we're going to go to microposts. Okay. And this is going to display microposts. So we can do a new micropost. So we've got content. Hi, my name is John. And then it's from user John B. And then create micropost. And, oh, that looks, user must exist. Oh, I see. So it's going to force us to actually have a user. So it's actually reinforcing some of the user stuff. So I think, what was it, Billy Bob? Did I actually give him a number or anything? Okay, I think I got to go back to actually go to the users and create okay, that's a user name. Let's see here. Okay, let me look here real quick. Oh yeah, this is user 2. So I think, yeah, that's right. That it's going to use the identity. Okay, so the primary key is going to be used. So let's go to microposts again. So this is user number 2, microposts. And I'm going to create a new micropost. I'll say, hi, I'm Billy. The user is going to be 2. And then create micropost, and that should succeed. It does. Good. Back to microposts. And it'll say that user 2 created this with the content, hi, I'm Billy. And of course, you can create new users, create new microposts, and they're connected in that way, essentially. So, all right. Let me see if I'm forgetting anything. So yeah, the routes. We probably want to look at the routes real quick just to see what's available. We're going to say bin/rails space routes. And it's going to show us all the different routes we have now, which will now include, of course, the articles, users, and microposts. So you see all 3 of these different resources, different entities that we've created. So this whole thing reinforces how Rails RESTful conventions scale. Each resource is isolated but follows identical patterns. Okay, you can easily add relationships later. For example, each micropost belongs to a user, like this. The same MVC principles govern every model controller pair. And you should notice the micropost controller looks nearly identical to the user controller. Okay, so if we, if we're under the controllers, the micropost controller is nearly identical. Okay, you've got set micropost instead of set user, micropost.all instead of user.all, etc., etc. Right. The database migration automatically creates the required table and columns, and the auto-generated views provide a full CRUD. And remember, we have to remember what that stands for, right? Create, read, update, delete. So it provides a full CRUD interface with 0 extra configuration. Some gotchas are always run the DB migrate after generating a new scaffold. Otherwise, you're going to get no such table, because it will exist with files in your Rails project, but it won't exist in the SQLite table unless you do DB migrate. Okay. When adding related models, you'll eventually use active record associations like belongs to and has many, etc. And don't delete or rename view controller files without updating the routes. Otherwise, you're going to end up with like orphaned files. Little bit more information. So we want to talk about the strengths and weaknesses of scaffolding. So Rails scaffolding is one of the fastest ways to get a full CRUD, create, read, update, delete, a full CRUD application up and running. It's the perfect entry point for beginners to see how models, controllers, and views fit together. However, while scaffolding is convenient, again, it's not meant for production-grade apps without customization. It's just a learning tool, basically, in a rapid prototype generator, but real-world applications usually refine or replace the generated code to meet the specific design, security, and performance needs. So what are the strengths? Well, the speed. One command, Rails generate scaffold, creates an entire working web interface. Convention reinforcement, okay? This shows how REST, MVC, and routing work in harmony. You get immediate feedback. You can view, create, edit, and delete records in the browser within minutes. You don't have to like load special software or phpMyAdmin or DB browser or anything like that. It's an excellent learning tool, so it can help you visualize Rails automatically, or automatic patterns rather, before you dive into manual coding. and code organization examples, so you can explore how models, controllers, and views interconnect. However, there are weaknesses, of course. It has a generic user interface. So the auto-generated views are plain and they're not styled. No CSS, no fun. Good for demonstration, but they're not user-friendly. You don't really have a bunch of business logic. Scaffolds create only the basic structure, not validation or model-level logic. There are security gaps. Controllers lack authentication and authorization by default. Over generation, you often get more files or methods than needed for smaller apps. Some things may not require, for example, external delete or, edit modifications in the particular fashion that it creates them. You have limited customization also, so real-world applications require tweaking the routes, controller logic, and form behavior. Scaffolding is like a training scaffold in construction. So it's essential for starting out, but eventually you'll remove and replace it once you understand the underlying structure. In the next chapters, you're going to build controllers, models, and routes manually to gain full control over your Rails applications. Okay, so another real short exercise. If you want to try to take a shot at this before watching me do it, you are welcome to do that. You could pause the video, in fact, but I would recommend you try to create a new resource called book. So you're going to generate the scaffolding, make sure to migrate the database, and then start the server, and then see if you can grab the books, create new books, etc. All right, give it a shot and pause the video and then come back when you're done or if you need some help. Okay, so each book has I guess I should have probably said this before, so you might have to pause it again, but each book has a title, author, and genre. Those are all strings. You'll generate it entirely through scaffolding. So make sure to commit your changes to Git if you would like at the end. And by the end, you should have a working RESTful resource for the books, clear understanding of how the scaffolding works with the routes and controllers, models, etc., and be able to experience the inspected generated MVC component. So if you want to give it another shot against the title, the author, and the genre, and they are all strings. Okay, so give it a minute. All right, let's do it together. So we've got bin/rails space generate scaffold book. Then you're going to do space title :string space author :string space genre :string. Hit enter. It will create these, everything related to it. And now we need to do bin/rails space db :migrate. Okay. And then we're going to run the server and at least make sure that we can see what it's doing. So bin/rails server, and we can go to the /books to see the fully functional website here. So we're going to do books, and there we go. We can add a new book. And title, author, genre, title, How to Be Awesome, John Baugh, because he knows a lot about that. And it's going to be, I guess it's science fiction. And then create the book. Okay, I don't think I put any connections there. There we go. I'll get back to books, and it will list the books just as we expected. All right. So we probably want to also, use Git. So reinforce what we've done. So when you finish doing work, you want to do git add dot, and that's going to add all the stuff that has been changed since your last commit. So we're going to do a commit m/add books scaffold for REST CRUD practice. Okay. There we go. You can do git log, and you can actually see what all you did with these gits. So the current one at the head is this one. If you let's say you completely screwed up your entire project, destroyed it, it blew up, everything's terrible, you can always go back to these different commits by their ID. Okay, so you could say, oh my gosh, I want a time machine, and then you can actually use that to help you get back. All right, some gotchas are always run bin rails db migrate before testing new scaffolds. Migration defines your database schema. If you encounter a table not found error, you likely forgot to do the migration. So be careful not to reuse existing model names like user or post unless you intend to overwrite them. Okay, so be careful with that. Remember that each scaffold automatically adds a route, such as like resources and then space : books in configure/routes.rb. Takeaway from this is that this exercise has demonstrated how to introduce, how easy it is to introduce new RESTful resources, how to gain CRUD functionality, and then it has helped you hopefully understand how Rails ties together the models, controllers, and views. All right, so from that point on, in future lectures, we're going to be customizing our controllers and building models manually. Scaffolding has shown us the Rails blueprint, but now we're going to end up designing our own architecture on top of it. But for this lecture, that's all you need. So just get used to that. Get familiar with the scaffolding, look at the code, specifically pay some attention to what's under the controllers, the models, and the views, because literally MVC is the cornerstone and the foundation of everything we're doing. All right, that's what I've got for you for this lecture. I will see you in the next lecture. Bye-bye.